We're gonna take apart a 100-year-old printing press. Construction methods were a lot different, and you need some specialty tools. A press like this still has application even today. Instead of printing, you can use it as a die cutter. I'm gonna remove the connecting rod. See, the screws are very vintage looking. Franklin would have worked on something like this. Pretty simple but effective design. The linkage that connects the machine to the ability to be able to hit that print. Need to loosen some of this up with some oil. Looking for a cheap die cutter. These typically would run about 150 bucks, maybe 200 bucks, instead of 15, 20,000 or more. It would have been around when Henry Ford was around, Thomas Edison, and Walt Disney. All these cast pieces were bolted together to make everything rigid. You can see if I shake this, there is like no movement. These things are heavy. It's one of the smaller machines, which is why I like it, because the big ones are really hard to work on because they're extremely heavy. You're looking to remove this connecting rod, use a chisel to just evenly pull it apart. Too much tension, it's not going to come apart. The handle that would engage the hit. There's no ball bearings in something like this. All bushings, very close tolerances. When I pull one of these apart, they're on their feet, but I wanted to make sure everybody was safe while I had it just stored in this field. An interesting construction method. In order to have this shaft not move, they add these things called keepers on here. And then when these are in place, nothing moves. I get these connecting rods off so I can swing this entire piece out of the way because it's so heavy. I have a lot of respect for these old castings. I mean, look how beautiful these are. I've got access to some of these bolts in here. The years I have probably replaced or fixed every piece on a machine like this. So old, guaranteed this would be lead-based paint. Take it apart piece by piece. Connecting rods off. I'll relieve some of the tension with this chisel. Tapped it in and I was able to get enough tension off to get this off. I can get the other side by using this chisel, just tapping it off. Back and forth, just keep working it until it pops. The connecting rod is off. Substantial piece. The exact same thing to the other side. I've rather taken them off equally, but that worked. Connecting rod's off, I'll be able to split the press in half just to get the weight down and then remove it at the pin or the hinge at the bottom. The second heavy piece off. This back piece here, this is an offset cam, so this is how you engage the hit for printing or die cutting. Get these keepers to move. Tap in here, you can see that keeper starting to move a little bit. Now this entire rod will move. The tolerances are so tight in here, you have to sand off this rust to make this move. With these gears, there's a special tool called a lady slipper crowbar that gets a pin like that out. And if you don't have that exact tool, this is not coming out. In the process, I'll pull this out. Last thing you want to do when you're working on one of these is take a hammer and strike this because it'll flare this, and then you're going to have to take a file, flatten it to get it all back together. It'll machine will pull this slide off. Back of the press, I want to get this out, but I don't want to hit it and flare it. That'd make it so it can't come out at all. The axle, I'll be able to use this as leverage to open this up. Right in here to get some leverage. This is really heavy. With enough leverage, you can move the world, and you can see now. That's how the press works. You can see this thing's lifted up, and you can see how much weight's on this thing. And also hear the precision of the hit. There is no bow or deflection in this machine. Remove the rust, you can move the keepers back and forth a bit. See, it's moving real nice now. In order to remove this, you can see that the keepers are gonna have to have this rod really clean. This side out. Now we'll be able to get the keepers, bring them all the way to the end and pop them off. It'll pull the keepers off, slide right off. You can remove this entire pin. Heavy, cold rolled steel. Just threaded all the way through this piece. So you've got to unthread it like this. Weak link of the entire machine. These pieces will break before the rest of the machine will. So it's good to have a few of these around. Part of the linkage. We're going to remove the power takeoff wheel and the flywheel. With a big enough gear puller, you can pull that. Cast iron is pretty soft, so I cut through with a some of this dirt so we can pull out the wheel. We'll tap off the wheel. Two bolts that have to be loose. All that rust is broken loose. We'll have it off here soon. Walking it off. There it is. Get the pinion gear off, we're gonna need this special tool called a slipper's foot. Come in all sizes. Sometimes a wedge will also take it out. There, it's moving. Give it another tap. We use the slipper crowbar to pull it all the way out. There's a bigger one to get a little bit more reach. You can see that it's completely pulled out. Now I'll just have to remove it. There we are, completely out. Clean off all the dirt. We'll use a file just to knock off all the corrosion. A little ding will stop it from coming off. With a thin piece of metal, and just give it a little push and you can see that it's moving. Working a little oil. We'll just work it back and forth. Get a hammer behind it so we'll tap it the rest of the way. One little burr on that shaft will stop everything. Getting pretty close. Just want to go evenly across the entire piece. There we go, now it's hand loose. We're off. You hit the shaft a few times with the hammer, so we want to deburr all that. You can feel those burrs. Very small, but very significant. On the other side, there's a bushing that needs to be removed with a flathead screwdriver. Unscrew the 3 screws, remove those, remove that bushing. Far we're able to pull it back. We'll have to dig out this flywheel. The entire wheel has to be floating, so all the dirt has to be removed. Move the wheel back and forth and just pull, and the shaft is starting to come out. Let a little oil soak in. Keep spinning all that rust off. I'm letting it soak in. I'll clean up this pin on the bottom so we can split the press in half. Loosen up the keepers on the bottom. You want to use a piece of wood to tap. You don't want to tap directly onto the metal and flare anything. Tap it on either side. Go this side, and then you may want to deburr from time to time. One flare or one burr and it's not going to come out. It's important that you don't strike this with metal or you'll flare it out. You can hit it with wood, or you can back it up with wood and then hit it with a metal hammer. And all the corrosion, you want it off this way and then back this way, and just keep going back and forth. When you drive it back and forth, take a file and make sure there's no burrs at all. We can see it's starting to move pretty good. I'll try tapping it out with a screwdriver. Starting to get it to go all the way through. Spin it a little bit and just keep working it through. It's nice and clean, and we'll see if we can get it all the way out. Now we're free and everything's unhinged. With a lever, we'll disconnect it. Now we've got everything disconnected. Start to loosen up the center support in there. You can see that it's moving. We'll remove the bolts on the striking plate, remove the sleeves that hold it on. See a spacing shim to make sure the tolerances are correct. Remove this flywheel here. There's a few issues. Got this bend in the pipe, and you're gonna have to take it out this hole right here. Sometimes you can grab onto this and just move it back and forth and pull as long as everything's clean. We'll move it back and forth and just keep rocking it and pulling like that. Take this center support out, but we've got to take the linkages off so everything moves nice and smooth and back and forth. Tap on the rod, but you can tap on the cast, and you can see it's moving. Pull out the restrictor. We'll use a punch and punch out the pin. It'll punch out, so it'll move back and forth. With the bolt loosened up, we can remove this part. We can remove the pins. We want to make sure we don't strike the rods, but we can strike the cast. There we go, that's starting to come out. With this pulled out, we can pull off the restrictor, pull the pin. Do the same thing to the other side. A pin out, the support will just fall. A bit heavy, but we can now pull this out. Just kind of move it back and forth, and we're free. Crowbar, we can now set the press up because it's a lot lighter. Remove the striker head. Remove the adjustment hardware. That's how you flatten the press. Remove the shroud and the wooden table. The bolts to the top support. Remove that top support. Move the upper cam for the printing rollers. Free up this gear axle. Put a pin in here. Give a little pressure. And there, we moved it a little bit. Plenty of oil in the oil ports. Everything back and forth until it moves. Want it to spin free. Got the press opened up so we can start to remove the striker. We are able to move it through its cycle. We can get the back bolts for the striker plate. We can start to work the striker loose. To equally from both sides. 2 crowbars, I've almost got it. Striker plate is clear. Start to remove the central pivot. The central pivot to the top so we can get it away from the cam. The cam lever comes off and then drop out the central pivot. It's really heavy. You can see those internal cams on this gear. Next step would be to remove the big gear with a very large puller, a lot bigger than this one. Ever wondered how this old machinery was put together? I hope you enjoyed this video. They don't build them like they used to.